Dr. Ethan Cole had always been fascinated by the unknown. As a xenolinguist and space communication specialist, he'd spent countless nights piecing together fractured signals, identifying cosmic anomalies, and dreaming of the day he'd hear from intelligent life beyond Earth. But tonight was different. This time, the air felt charged. The hum of the lab's machinery was almost a comforting backdrop to his silent vigil over the galaxy's vast expanse. His fingers drummed anxiously on his console as he scanned the transmissions. It started with a flicker on his screen, a faint blip that initially seemed like cosmic noise, perhaps a star's dying gasp, or an asteroid passing too close to a pulsar. But something about this signal stood out, an underlying rhythm, a repetition that he couldn't shake. He leaned closer, adjusting the audio and visual filters to sharpen the signal. The blip resolved itself, pulsing in a strange but oddly organized pattern, and his heartbeat quickened. This was no ordinary background radiation. It was structured, intentional, a message. The signal repeated every few seconds, a series of pulses followed by brief silences. Ethan's eyes widened as he recognized the pattern. It wasn't random. It was precise, almost mathematical, as though someone, or something, were calling out into the void, hoping someone might be listening. His mind raced, 1,000 questions bubbling to the surface. Who was sending this signal? And more importantly, what did it mean? Ethan glanced around the empty lab. The sterile white walls and the hum of equipment were his only companions at this hour. Most of his colleagues had long since left, their skepticism toward alien communication clear. They were satisfied with the belief that humanity was, for now, alone in the galaxy. But Ethan, he lived for these moments. He settled back into his chair, taking a deep breath as he began isolating and amplifying the signal. The first step was breaking down the pulses, analyzing their intervals and strength. Every detail mattered. He zoomed in on the waveforms, watching as the intricate patterns emerged. The signal had depth to it, layers within layers, suggesting an advanced form of communication far beyond any natural phenomenon he'd encountered. As he worked, his excitement grew. This was unlike anything he'd seen before. His fingers flew over the keyboard, running the data through every algorithm he'd developed over the years. Hours passed, and he lost track of time, entirely immersed in decoding the mysterious transmission. Just as he was beginning to see patterns forming, a sharp voice crackled over the intercom. "Dr. Cole, it's after hours. Are you still in the lab?" It was Major Donovan from Earth's Interstellar Defense Division. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, realizing how late it had gotten, but he couldn't stop now. "Yes, Major," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm analyzing a signal. It's unusual. I think it might be a distress call, something alien." There was a pause, then a skeptical laugh. "A distress call? And you think it's alien? Dr. Cole, we've discussed these wild theories of yours before. I suggest you go home and get some rest." Ethan clenched his jaw. It wasn't the first time the military had dismissed his work. To them, every signal was either space debris or background radiation, and anything beyond that was a potential threat. But he knew what he'd found. This was different. "Major, with all due respect, I believe this signal is genuine," he replied, struggling to keep his tone even. "It's repeating, and the structure suggests intelligent design. I need more time to analyze it." Another pause. This one longer. When Donovan finally responded, his voice was colder. "Dr. Cole, your resources are limited for a reason. We can't have you chasing shadows. Log your findings and call it a night." "That's an order." The intercom clicked off, leaving Ethan in frustrated silence. His superiors had never been supportive of his work, considering it a drain on valuable resources. But he couldn't let this go. Every instinct told him that this was real, that somewhere out there, someone needed help. Ignoring the nagging warning in his mind, he continued working, leaning closer to the console. As the hours slipped by, he began to make progress. The signal wasn't just structured, it was layered, with multiple frequencies woven together like a symphony. And embedded within, he caught the faintest hint of repetition, words, or at least the closest equivalent he could find. He worked meticulously, isolating each layer, translating what he could of the strange alien syntax. "Desperation. Time is fading." The words flashed across his screen, sending a chill down his spine. The translation was rough, patchy at best, but the meaning was unmistakable. Whoever was sending this signal was running out of time. Ethan stared at the message, his mind racing. What kind of civilization could craft such an intricate call for help, and how desperate must they be to reach out to the stars like this? Despite the Major's warning, he couldn't abandon the signal. If he was right, if this truly was an alien SOS, then ignoring it might mean abandoning an entire race to their doom. He leaned back, rubbing his temples as exhaustion tugged at him, but the urgency of the message wouldn't let him rest. He had to keep going. As dawn approached, Ethan finally leaned back in his chair, his body aching from hours spent hunched over the console. The signal continued to play, looping the same desperate phrase over and over. He'd managed to decode only a fragment, but that fragment was enough to haunt him. He knew what he had to do. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan began to record every detail of the signal. He saved the waveform, documented each pulse and pattern, and prepared a report. This time, he would go beyond his usual channels. If the military refused to support him, he'd find other ways. He'd reach out to the scientific community, to anyone who might be able to help. Just as he began preparing his files, the lab door creaked open. He froze, expecting Major Donovan or another officer ready to reprimand him. But it was Carla, a young lab technician who shared his passion for the unknown. She offered a tired smile, holding out a thermos of coffee. "Figured you might still be here," she said softly. "I saw the signal logs. This really could be it, couldn't it?" Ethan took the coffee, gratitude swelling within him. "It could, but I need help. There's not much time, and the military's already on my case." Carla nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Then let's make it count." Ethan felt a surge of relief. Maybe he wasn't as alone in this as he thought. With Carla by his side, he returned to the console, driven by a single, unshakable purpose: to save a distant civilization from the jaws of oblivion. The hours that followed were a blur of frantic work and whispered conversations. Ethan and Carla dove headfirst into the task, poring over every fragment of the alien signal, examining each pulse, each fluctuation, each subtle nuance. Time seemed to dissolve as they deciphered the mysterious language piece by painful piece. It was as if the message itself resisted being understood, every new breakthrough followed by yet another frustrating setback. Ethan's head throbbed with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. The words that had appeared on his screen, even in their rough translation, desperation, time is fading, were haunting. Whoever was sending this message was clinging to hope, stretching across light years to reach anyone who might listen. He couldn't let them down. He leaned over the console, eyes scanning the screen as his fingers danced across the keyboard, applying different algorithms to parse the message. It felt like he was peering through a fog, each attempt revealing just a bit more clarity before clouding over again. He muttered to himself, frustration creeping into his voice. "It's like they're using a language that isn't just spoken, it's felt." Carla looked up, rubbing her eyes. "You mean like an emotional language? Is that even possible?" Ethan shrugged, lost in thought. "Possible or not, that's what it feels like. Every time I think I'm getting close, it shifts, like it's designed to evoke something instead of just convey information." He paused, thinking back to his studies. Some civilizations theorize language as more than just words. Maybe they're trying to share their emotions, their desperation. Carla nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. "So if we're going to understand this, we need to feel it as much as decode it." That's both fascinating and terrifying. They worked in silence, the only sounds in the lab the hum of equipment and the steady tap of keys. Each breakthrough, no matter how small, was a moment of triumph, but the gaps in their understanding left Ethan feeling hollow. Despite their progress, a sense of dread hung over him. Time was ticking, and with each passing moment the signal grew weaker, as though the source itself was fading, its lifeline slowly slipping away. As they deciphered more fragments, Ethan's heart sank. The message was filled with details of destruction, cities collapsing, desperate cries for help, and an overwhelming sense of loss. It was as if the planet itself were falling apart, and its inhabitants were powerless to stop it. The alien civilization was on the brink of extinction, its people trapped and reaching out in one last attempt to find salvation. But decoding the message was only part of the problem. The military was growing suspicious, their grip on Ethan's resources tightening. Just that morning, Major Donovan had called again, his voice cold and unforgiving. "Dr. Cole, you're wasting government resources on a wild theory. If you can't show us concrete proof, we'll be forced to shut you down," Ethan had argued, pleaded even, but Donovan's stance was immovable. The official line was simple: Earth couldn't risk trusting an unknown alien signal. To them, it was too dangerous, the potential risks outweighing any possible benefit. And deep down, a part of Ethan understood their caution. What if this was a trap? What if the signal was a lure, designed to draw humanity into a deadly confrontation? The doubts gnawed at him, feeding into his anxiety. He'd always been the one advocating for the possibility of peaceful contact, a pioneer who believed in bridging gaps between species. But now, he found himself questioning everything. What if he wasn't up to the task? What if he failed, letting down an entire civilization in its last moments? Carla seemed to sense his unease. She looked at him, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan, you're the best person for this. If anyone can crack this, it's you." He shook his head, forcing a smile. "I appreciate that, Carla, but what if I'm wrong? What if this is all just a wild chase? People are putting their trust in me, and I'm not even sure I trust myself right now." "Listen," she said, leaning in, her eyes steady. "I didn't stay here to work with just anyone. I stayed because I believe in you, in what you're trying to do. You're not just doing this for yourself or for science. You're doing it for them, those people out there, wherever they are. And if they're willing to send a message like this across the stars, maybe they're worth trusting too." Ethan sighed, her words sinking in, quieting his doubts, at least for the moment. He knew she was right. The aliens had reached out in desperation, and the least he could do was try to understand them, to make sense of their call for help. They continued working, driven by a renewed sense of purpose, delving deeper into the signal's layers. After hours of painstaking effort, they managed to decipher another fragment. This one was different, more coherent, and it held a chilling detail. Planet, unstable, core fracturing, millions at risk. The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Not only was this civilization pleading for help, but their very world was tearing itself apart. They weren't just dealing with an alien distress call, they were dealing with a potential catastrophe on a planetary scale. As they processed the information, the door to the lab suddenly swung open. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat as a tall, imposing figure strode in. Major Donovan. He surveyed the lab with a cold, calculating gaze before focusing on Ethan. "Dr. Cole, I thought I made myself clear. This little project of yours is over," he said, his voice icy. "You've wasted enough of our resources. We have protocols for a reason." Ethan stood, clenching his fists. "Major, with all due respect, I think you're wrong. This isn't just a random signal. This is a civilization on the brink of destruction. They're reaching out to us, pleading for help. We can't ignore that." Donovan raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "And how do you know it's not a trap? A ploy to get us to lower our defenses?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "Because it's too real. No one could fake this level of desperation. We owe it to them, and to ourselves, to try and help." The major stared him down, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Ethan thought he might actually consider his plea, but then Donovan shook his head, turning toward the door. "My decision stands, Dr. Cole. You're to cease all work on this immediately." With that, he left, leaving Ethan and Carla in stunned silence. Ethan slumped into his chair, his mind racing. He knew the major wouldn't change his mind. The window for saving this alien race was closing, and they were running out of time. Carla's voice broke the silence, her tone defiant. "So what are we going to do now?" Ethan looked at her, a fire rekindling in his eyes. "We keep going. Whatever it takes, we're going to crack this message, and we're going to find a way to help them. They're counting on us." And with renewed determination, they plunged back into their work, each pulse of the alien signal driving them forward as they raced against time. Ethan's mind raced as he leaned over the console, his eyes flicking across the decoded message fragments that filled the screen. The alien message was fractured, incomplete, yet its content was unmistakably desperate. Each line spoke of collapsing cities, seismic upheavals, and a planet on the brink of tearing itself apart. It was a world gasping for air, its inhabitants clinging to a final sliver of hope that someone, somewhere, might hear their plea, and Earth's leaders wanted to ignore it. The frustration gnawed at him, an ache that settled in his bones. How could they be so blind? How could they dismiss such a clear call for help, turning their backs on an entire civilization just because of fear? Ethan's faith in humanity's courage and curiosity, the very principles he had built his career on, felt as if it were crumbling alongside the alien planet. Carla watched him silently, as though she could sense the tempest of emotions building inside him. She offered him a look that was equal parts sympathy and determination. "You're not giving up, are you?" Ethan shook his head, his jaw set. "Number, I can't. We're running out of time, and they're running out of hope. If I stop now, I'll never forgive myself." She nodded, her voice steady. "Then we'll do this together." They resumed their work with an intensity born of desperation. Ethan toggled between layers of the message, decoding fragments and piecing them together like a puzzle. The language itself was baffling. It shifted and adapted, as if designed to confound any who tried to understand it. Yet he could sense that it was alive, that each symbol and phrase carried meaning deeper than simple words. It was a language built on feeling, on raw emotion. Hours passed in strained silence, the faint hum of the equipment the only sound as they chipped away at the cryptic message. Each fragment uncovered painted a more vivid picture of the alien civilization's final days. They had once thrived, their world lush and vibrant, teeming with life. But then came the tremors, the ground shuddering and splitting open, cities swallowed by the earth itself. There was mention of a core breach, a planetary catastrophe they couldn't escape. As the details emerged, Ethan felt his own anxiety mounting. He could feel the desperation of the alien people seep into him, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. The more he learned, the clearer it became that this wasn't just an SOS, it was a plea for salvation, a last-ditch effort to reach anyone who might be able to help. He paused, his gaze lingering on one of the decoded phrases, "Our children, their lives fade like light against the dying sun." It was a haunting image, one that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just adults, soldiers, or scientists reaching out. It was parents, families clinging to a sliver of hope for their young. He swallowed hard, his resolve only hardening. Carla broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, this is bigger than we thought. If we don't act, they'll all be gone." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "And the people in charge can't see that. They're so afraid of the unknown that they'd rather do nothing than risk being wrong." Suddenly, the door to the lab swung open, and Ethan and Carla stiffened, turning to see who had entered. It was Major Donovan, flanked by two armed security officers. The major's face was a mask of cold disapproval. "Dr. Cole," Donovan said, his tone as rigid as steel, "I thought I made myself clear. You were to cease all work on this project." Ethan stood, squaring his shoulders. He was exhausted, his body drained, but he wasn't about to back down. "Major, if you'll just listen." "I'm done listening to your theories," Donovan interrupted. "This signal is a potential threat. We don't know who these aliens are, or what they want. You're endangering Earth's security with your reckless obsession." Ethan felt a surge of anger rise in him. "Reckless? This isn't some paranoid fantasy, Major. This is real. These people are dying, and they're begging for our help. They're not some faceless enemy. They're parents, families. If we ignore them, we're condemning them to death." Donovan's gaze remained unwavering, and Ethan could see the cold dismissal in his eyes. "We don't owe them anything, Dr. Cole. Humanity's safety comes first. I'm shutting this operation down, and that's final." The words struck Ethan like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, Donovan gestured to the security officers. "Escort Dr. Cole and Ms. Ramirez out of the lab. I'll be securing the data." One of the officers moved toward Ethan, a grim expression on his face. Ethan looked to Carla, who met his gaze, her eyes filled with silent resolve. She nodded, a barely perceptible gesture, before they were led out of the lab and down the sterile white hallways. As they walked, Ethan felt his mind racing. He couldn't let this end here. He'd come too far, and he couldn't abandon those people. Not now, not when he was so close to understanding. There had to be another way. Once they were alone, Carla leaned in, her voice a whisper. "We're not done, are we?" Ethan glanced at her, a spark of determination igniting within him. They may have locked us out, but they can't keep us from doing what's right. We still have a few tricks up our sleeves." Carla's lips curved into a small smile. "I knew you wouldn't give up that easily." They regrouped, meeting later that night in a secluded corner of the research complex. Using a combination of old data files and backdoor access points Carla had established, they managed to re-enter the system. It was risky. If they were caught, they'd likely be fired, or worse. But the thought of leaving those aliens to die in silence was a far heavier burden. Ethan accessed the last fragments of the message, their makeshift equipment whirring as he pieced together the remaining clues. Each word, each phrase was a glimpse into a world unraveling before his eyes. He felt a grim satisfaction as he pushed forward, determined to finish what he'd started. Finally, after hours of work, they decoded one last message fragment, one that left Ethan breathless. "We have one hope left. In you." He stared at the screen, feeling the weight of those words. The aliens had placed their trust in him, in humanity, in the idea that someone, somewhere, would care enough to listen. It was a gamble, a final shot in the dark, and they'd chosen to believe in the goodness of a species they'd never even met. Ethan turned to Carla, his voice choked with emotion. "They're counting on us. We can't let them down." Carla nodded, her own eyes misty with the weight of their mission. "Then let's finish this." They knew that once they completed the decoding, they would have to take their findings to the highest levels of government, no matter the risk. They couldn't let bureaucratic fear silence a cry for help, and as they worked, their resolve only grew, steeling them for the battle they knew was yet to come. With one final push, they prepared to make the truth known, no matter the cost. Ethan sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the only sound the quiet hum of his laptop as he reviewed the decoded fragments of the alien message. Every piece told a story of desperation, painted a picture of a civilization on the edge of annihilation, waiting and hoping against hope that someone, anyone, might respond. The weight of it all pressed on his chest, a constant reminder that time was running out. He glanced at his watch. Midnight. Major Donovan's words echoed in his mind, stern and final. "I'm shutting this operation down, and that's final." But the certainty in Donovan's voice couldn't erase the certainty Ethan felt in his bones. He couldn't abandon the alien's plea. Not when he'd come this far. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was Carla. He picked up, her voice on the other end a quiet but determined whisper. "Ethan, I've managed to get some old lab equipment together. It's not much, but it might help us if you're still up for this." Ethan felt a rush of relief, more than ever. "Meet me at the research complex's old annex. We'll work from there." He threw on a jacket, grabbed his laptop and notes, and headed out. The night was still and the air was thick with tension. This was their last chance. Their final push. He could feel it. The closer he got to the annex, the more his resolve hardened. They would have to make their voices heard, no matter the obstacles. In the annex, Carla had already set up a makeshift lab, wires snaking across the floor, and a small array of monitors blinking in the darkness. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with determination. "Let's get to work." They dove into the task, Ethan patching together fragments while Carla modified the equipment to amplify the signal. Every minute counted. Every passing second another tick in the countdown toward an inevitable disaster. The alien message was their only guide, each decoded phrase a window into a distant, dying world. Hours passed in silence as they worked, their exhaustion mounting, but neither dared to stop. Finally, a breakthrough. Carla let out a gasp as the screen flashed with a translated phrase: "Children, alone, fading light, time lost." Ethan's heart clenched. The message was more than a cry for help. It was a farewell, a testament to a civilization's last breath, the words of parents pleading for the lives of their young. He imagined the faces of those sending the message, their eyes turned skyward, their hopes pinned on an unknown receiver. "We have to do something," Carla murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "We can't let this be their final message. We can't just let them go." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The alien world was out there, a place teetering on the edge, and they were its last faint hope. He took a deep breath, a plan forming in his mind. It was a risk, a long shot, but it was all they had. "We're going to send a response," he said, the words coming out more confident than he felt. "If we can bounce a signal back, maybe they'll know we heard them. It might be enough to buy us some time, enough to make Earth's leaders listen." Carla looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "And if it doesn't work?" Ethan hesitated, then forced a smile. "Then at least we'll know we tried." They worked with a renewed urgency, piecing together a response that would carry humanity's own message of hope, an assurance that someone had heard their call. Every line they crafted, every word they chose, was meant to convey a single promise: "We hear you, and we're coming." As they prepared to send the message, a sudden alert blared from the equipment. Ethan's pulse quickened as the monitors lit up, the alien signal spiking with a strange, urgent rhythm. Carla's fingers flew over the keyboard as she adjusted the filters, amplifying the signal to catch every detail. It's them," she whispered, her eyes wide. "They're responding to us." Ethan stared at the screen, watching as symbols and patterns scrolled past. A new layer to the alien message. It was fragmented, garbled, but the intent was clear. They'd reached out, and someone out there was reaching back. Just as the signal began to stabilize, the door to the annex burst open. Major Donovan stormed in, flanked by a group of security officers. His face was set in a mask of fury, his voice cold and unyielding. Dr. Cole, I warned you. This operation was shut down for a reason. Ethan's heart pounded as he faced Donovan, every fiber of his being resisting the urge to back down. Major, we're in contact with them. They're real, they're alive, and they need our help. This isn't a threat. It's a cry for mercy. Donovan's expression didn't soften. You've jeopardized Earth's safety, Dr. Cole. You and Ms. Ramirez have ignored direct orders and used government resources for unauthorized purposes. This ends now. Ethan's fists clenched. Major, if we do nothing, they're going to die. Every minute we delay, more lives are lost. They're not our enemies. They're victims. Innocent families, children. Donovan's eyes narrowed. And what if this is all a trick? What if we're being lured into a trap? Can you guarantee the safety of our planet? Ethan took a deep breath, meeting Donovan's gaze with a steady resolve. No, I can't. But can you live with the choice of letting them die just because you were afraid? Is that who we are as a species? For a moment, the room fell silent, the tension thick as a storm. Donovan's jaw tightened, his gaze hard and unyielding. You're risking everything on a guess, Dr. Cole, and I can't allow that. Without another word, he gestured to the security officers. Escort them out and erase all data related to this project. As the officers approached, Ethan's mind whirred, desperation clawing at him. This couldn't be the end. He wouldn't let it be. Suddenly, Carla gripped his arm, a spark of defiance in her eyes. Ethan, she whispered, her gaze flicking toward the control panel. The backup. They don't know about it. Realization dawned on him. In a last-ditch effort, Carla had saved their data to an encrypted backup drive, hidden within the system. Even if Donovan erased everything here, they'd still have a record. He nodded subtly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. They weren't beaten yet. The officers led them out of the annex, but Ethan's mind was already racing, his resolve unshaken. They had one last shot. The backup data would be their proof, their final piece of evidence to convince the world that this wasn't just a wild theory. As they walked out into the night, Carla looked at him, her eyes filled with the same determination he felt. What now? We go public, he replied, his voice steady. If the government won't listen, then we'll make sure the world hears us. They knew the risks, knew that defying direct orders could end their careers, their reputations, even their freedom. But that no longer mattered. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was fading, and the only thing standing between them and oblivion was Ethan's promise. He took a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling over him. This was it, their final stand. Together, he and Carla would see this through. No matter the cost, humanity had to be better than this, braver than its fears. And with that thought, they set off into the night, ready to risk everything for the lives hanging in the balance. The following day, Ethan and Carla huddled in a small, windowless room within a rundown building on the edge of the city. They'd chosen the location deliberately, a forgotten tech startup's old office, its servers left behind, gathering dust. Here, they were out of the government's reach, working with a makeshift setup cobbled together from outdated consoles and modified devices Carla had managed to borrow from an old contact. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. The clock was ticking. Ethan's heart pounded as he prepared the encrypted backup. Their last attempt to get their message out had only solidified his resolve. Donovan had tried to bury the evidence, but thanks to Carla's quick thinking, they still had a chance to make contact. They were on their own, without government support, resources, or protection, but none of that mattered now. The truth was all that mattered. Carla adjusted one of the consoles, her brow furrowed in concentration. I've reconfigured the servers to boost our transmission signal, she said. It's not as powerful as what we had back in the lab, but it should be enough to get through. Ethan nodded, watching as the monitor flickered, the alien signal faint but steady. The translation software hummed as it worked to decode the final fragments, every word another piece of the alien's tragic story. Let's send our message, he said, his voice low and determined. If they hear us, if they can just hold on a little longer. Carla gave him a tight smile, the weight of their mission evident in her eyes. She hit the transmit button, and Ethan's pre-prepared message streamed out, pulsing across the dark expanse of space. It was a simple message, carefully crafted to convey both humanity's compassion and intent. We hear you. We want to help. Hold on. They waited in silence, the only sound the quiet hum of the servers and the soft, anxious tapping of Carla's fingers against the console. Every second stretched into an eternity. Ethan's mind raced with questions, his heart pounding as he imagined the aliens on the other end, waiting, hoping. Would they even understand the message? Could they still respond? And then, a faint blip. Carla's fingers froze, her eyes widening as the signal grew stronger, clearer. It was different this time, almost as if the aliens themselves sensed the urgency. The screen flashed with symbols, patterns flowing in a new rhythm, each sequence pulsing like a heartbeat. Ethan's breath caught as the translated message scrolled across the screen. Hope, renewed, we hold, but time is lost. He read the message aloud, each word resonating deeply within him. They were clinging to hope, even with time slipping away. His heart swelled with both relief and anguish. The aliens had heard them, but their time was almost gone. What do we do now? Carla asked, her voice barely a whisper, the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. Ethan clenched his fists, staring at the screen. We need to get the public on our side. If people knew, if they could see what we're seeing, they'd understand why this matters. We need the world to hear this story, to feel the desperation of these people. He pulled up the final backup, selecting key parts of the transmission, the fragments that told of the alien civilization's once thriving world, their planet's catastrophic breakdown, their pleas for help, their final breaths of hope. Carla was already one step ahead, contacting journalists, scientists, anyone who might lend credibility to their story. Ethan knew the risks, knew that revealing classified information would paint them as traitors in the government's eyes, but it didn't matter. This was bigger than them. Within hours, the first article went live, published by an independent media outlet that had picked up the story. The headline blazed across screens worldwide: Alien SOS, a civilization's final plea and the scientist defying orders to answer. The story spread like wildfire, igniting discussions, debates, and a tidal wave of public support. People were moved by the aliens' plight, inspired by Ethan and Carla's determination. They demanded answers, pushing government officials to explain why they'd turned their backs on a dying world. The outcry grew, filling every news cycle, sparking protests and conversations across social media. Answer the Call trended within hours, a rallying cry for humanity's first act of compassion on an interstellar scale. Ethan watched the news coverage, his heart pounding as he saw people from all walks of life rallying behind them. Scientists, activists, even high-ranking officials started to speak out, demanding that the government reconsider. He exchanged a look with Carla, their unspoken relief palpable. But even as public support grew, so did the backlash. Military representatives issued statements, insisting that the alien message was a potential threat, a ploy designed to bait Earth into a vulnerable position. Donovan appeared on multiple news programs, warning the public against what he called reckless, uninformed compassion. But for every voice of caution, there were a dozen more calling for empathy, for action. Late that night, as Ethan and Carla sat in the small office, a new notification pinged on their console. It was a message from the alien civilization, a final fragment that sent chills down their spines. Our light fades, but your voices, we hear. Thank you for seeing us. The message was both a farewell and a gesture of gratitude. Ethan's throat tightened as he read it aloud, his voice barely steady. The aliens had felt their support, sensed the compassion pouring out from Earth. It was all they had wanted, to know that, even in their final moments, someone cared. Just as they absorbed the weight of the message, a loud knock sounded at the door. Ethan and Carla exchanged a glance, their hearts racing as they realized who it might be. Carla opened the door cautiously, and in strode Major Donovan, flanked by two security officers. His face was unreadable, his gaze cold. "Dr. Cole, Ms. Ramirez," he said, his voice low. "It seems you've managed to create quite a stir." Ethan stood tall, meeting Donovan's gaze with unflinching resolve. "We're just doing what's right, Major. The world deserves to know the truth." Donovan's jaw clenched. "The truth is subjective, Dr. Cole, and in this case your actions have threatened national security. I'm here to bring you in." Carla stepped forward, defiant. "So you're going to silence us, even now, with the whole world watching?" Donovan's eyes flicked between them, a glint of something almost like respect flashing across his face. He hesitated, then sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "You've forced our hand. The public demands action, and despite my misgivings, the higher-ups are starting to listen." Ethan's heart leaped. "Does that mean—" Donovan held up a hand, silencing him. "It means that, under strict conditions, we're preparing a rescue mission." "You've stirred the world, Dr. Cole, but this is no victory lap. We're moving forward, but cautiously. You'll be brought in as consultants, under surveillance." Ethan exchanged a look with Carla, the weight of the moment settling over them. This was what they had fought for, the chance to answer a call that transcended species, planets, even fear itself. Donovan turned to leave, casting one last glance over his shoulder. "You wanted the world to act, Dr. Cole. Now let's hope your faith in these aliens is worth it." As he disappeared into the night, Ethan felt a sense of relief and triumph wash over him. The mission was underway. Their message had been heard, and humanity was about to make its first leap into a future defined by compassion, not fear. Ethan paced nervously across the steel-plated floor of the command center, his heart racing as final preparations unfolded around him. Monitors lined the walls, each displaying feeds from the rescue mission underway, a small but agile fleet dispatched to respond to the Alien SOS. Scientists, diplomats, and even a handful of civilian representatives filled the room, united by a common purpose: humanity's first contact with a civilization that desperately needed them. Major Donovan stood across the room, his expression stoic, but his posture tense. Though he had been among the mission's most vocal critics, the overwhelming public support had left the military little choice but to act. They could no longer ignore the outcry, nor the possibility that this mission could be the dawn of something greater. Ethan and Carla's fight had shifted the tide, propelling humanity to the brink of interstellar compassion. Carla glanced over at Ethan, her face a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. "Can you believe it?" she whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the bustling activity around them. "We did it. They're actually going." Ethan smiled, though the weight of the mission still bore down on him. "It doesn't feel real. I hope we're not too late." Their signal had confirmed that the aliens were still there, still holding on, but the urgency in their final message lingered like a shadow. "Our light fades," the phrase echoed in his mind, a reminder that time was slipping away. The fleet would reach the alien system in a matter of hours, but no one knew what they would find, whether they would arrive in time to help or bear witness to the aftermath of unimaginable loss. As the fleet approached the coordinates, the command center grew silent, every person's gaze fixed on the main monitor displaying the live feed. The alien planet, a small blue-green sphere, filled the screen. At first glance, it looked eerily similar to Earth, but as the camera zoomed in, the damage became apparent. Cracks marred the planet's surface, some stretching for miles, as if the very land itself were splitting open. Dark clouds roiled across the sky, casting a pall over the landscape, a world gasping in its final throes. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had read the message fragments, glimpsed the devastation through words, but seeing it now, so vivid and real, struck him deeply. This was what the aliens had endured, the world they'd tried to save. The weight of their struggle, their resilience, settled heavily over him. "Prepare to establish contact," ordered one of the mission commanders, her voice crisp and steady despite the tension that filled the air. Technicians scrambled, adjusting frequencies, calibrating translators. The alien signal flickered on the monitor, faint but still alive. They were waiting. Ethan moved closer, his heart pounding. He couldn't help but wonder who or what might respond. What did they look like? How would they react to the sight of a foreign fleet descending upon their dying world? He glanced at Carla, her expression mirroring his own mix of anticipation and trepidation. Finally, the translator flickered, and the faint, warbling sounds of the alien language filled the room. It was unlike anything they'd heard before, a layered, melodic pattern that seemed to vibrate with emotion. The translator struggled to keep up, piecing together fragments of meaning until a rough translation appeared on the screen. "We hear you." The words brought a collective sigh of relief throughout the command center. They were still there, still able to communicate. The alien signal steadied and more words appeared, though fragmented and broken. "Thank you for hearing us. Our world crumbles. Our people few." Ethan's throat tightened. The desperation, the gratitude, it was all there, even through the fractured message. He felt as though he could see them, the survivors huddled in their remaining shelters, their eyes turned skyward in a final act of faith. One of the mission's diplomats stepped forward, activating the microphone. "This is humanity coming to your aid. We have heard your call and are here to help in any way we can." The translation took a moment to process, and then the alien response appeared. "We did not believe anyone would come. Our hope faded long ago." Ethan and Carla exchanged a glance, the poignancy of those words hitting hard. The aliens had reached out not in certainty, but in the smallest flicker of hope, a last gasp across the stars. And somehow, they had held on. The feed shifted as the fleet's scanners mapped the planet, locating pockets of survivors scattered across the surface. It was clear that the alien civilization was in its final days, its infrastructure crumbling, its people weary and broken. The fleet's crew quickly formulated a plan, deploying drones and support teams to begin evacuations from the most affected areas.